wars, which means there was more than one, right? Now, remember what Lord de la Warr said? What did he do when he arrived in 1610? What did he do right away? Basically declared war, did he not, on the Indians. So the relationship between the colonists and the Indians became very strained. So when he, actually, you remember when he left and the Virginia Company of London sent him to get things straightened around, they basically told him, the Virginia Company of London, they basically told him, we want a declaration of war against those Indians in the Jamestown region. We want them gone. So he used Irish tactics against the Indians. Irish tactics.
Wait, is this Lord de la Warr stuff?
Yep. De la Warr's orders from the Virginia Company of London amounted to a declaration of war against the Indians in the Jamestown region, and he used what were known as Irish tactics against the Indians, and that's on your ID sheet. And the Irish tactics consisted of the following three things. Raiding Indian villages. Burning homes and confiscating provisions. That would be their supplies. Okay? Burning homes and confiscating their provisions. And the third thing they did, because these Indians were quite advanced and they knew how to grow crops, is they torched or burned their cornfields. So they just basically terrorized them by using Irish tactics. Raiding Indian villages, burning their homes, and confiscating their provisions, and torching their cornfields. And this war lasted until 1614 when a peace settlement was agreed upon. Guess how they sealed the peace settlement between the Powhatan Indians and the Anglos? Pocahontas got married. And who did she marry? No, that's, you know, a lot of people think that, but that's, who did she marry? John Rolfe. Very good. But a lot of people think that. That's not true. John Smith did not marry Pocahontas. How many people thought John Smith married Pocahontas? Nobody cares? A lot of people thought that. No, it was John Rolfe that married Pocahontas. Well, peace lasted for about 8 years or so. But these Powhatan Indians got tired of these land-hungry whites. And they got tired of European diseases that were brought over. So they had another uprising. The Powhatan Indians had another uprising in 1622. So the second Anglo-Powhatan War started. After 8 years of peace after the first wars, because they were tired of land-hungry whites and diseases that the Europeans were bringing to their people, they uprose again in 1622. And this time they had a little bit of the upper hand. They had a series of Indian attacks that killed 347 colonists, including John Rolfe. So the Indians struck back in 1622 and a series of Indian attacks that killed 347 colonists, including John Rolfe. How do you think the Virginia Company of London responded to that? After they killed 347 colonists, including John Rolfe. Well, you know what they did? They sent new orders over there to de la Warr. And his orders, their orders are on your ID sheet. What were the orders, Will? What were the orders that, new orders the Virginia Company of London sent after the 347 settlers and John Rolfe were killed?
Lord de la Warr?
They called for what?
Perpetual war.
A perpetual war without peace or truce. So the new orders that came out to the Jamestown colony in response to the Indians' attack was a perpetual war without peace or truce. When you have a war without peace or truce, what does that mean? What is your plan to do with the enemy?
Kill all of them.
Exterminate, right? Pretty much, because you're not going to ever have a peace treaty, right? So, if you're the Indians, what are the two big problems you have with a perpetual war without peace or truce? What's it going to do to your population? Lower it dramatically, and those that lived moved where? Where do you think they moved? If they fought in the area we know as Virginia, fought. If they did survive, did they go this way?
No.
They went westward. Okay? And this, if you know anything about Native American history, this is the first pushing of Native Americans west, and we continue to push them and push them and push them and push them and push them for the next 2 centuries. So, this perpetual war without peace or truce resulted in a systematically reduced rate of Native Americans, almost to extinction to a point, not really, but kind of. And the ones that survived were pushed farther westward, out of lands that the Virginia Company of London wanted. And this is the start of a perpetual pushing Native Americans out of their homes for 2 centuries. And you'll learn more about that later too.
Yeah.
Well, finally, in 1644, the Indians made one last effort to dislodge the colonists from Virginia, but were defeated again. So you actually had 3 attempts by the Powhatan tribe, and in 1644 they made one last effort to dislodge the colonists, but because of the strength the colonists had devised in that period of time, they were defeated a 3rd time. So when we talk about the Anglo-Powhatan Wars, we talk about 3 attempts for the Indians to try to get back what they thought was theirs, all defeated. Now, by 1669, they did an official census of the Powhatan Indian tribe and how many were left from when they first started this whole mess. Guess what percentage of the Powhatan population still existed in 1669 from the very start? 10. 10%. There were only 2,000 Powhatan Indians left after this mess in 1669. That year came about. So if they only have 10%, how many? Anybody do any math? What's 2,000? If you what would be the original number they had? 20,000 times 10% is what? 2,000. So they lost 90% of their tribe in these wars. 90%. By 1685, the Powhatan tribe was basically extinct. By 1685, the Powhatan tribe was basically extinct. They fell victim to disease, disorganization, and disposability. 3 Ds. By 1685, the Powhatan tribe was basically extinct. They fell victim to, number 1, disease that the Europeans brought, their disorganization, and their disposability. What's disposability? Losing their lives in war. Okay? Now this disruption of Native American life that started in this area clear back to 1685 would be both demographic and cultural transformations for Native Americans, forever. You're going to hear as we go into this, and you'll get a big unit on this, how we continued to push Native Americans westward, to the point there was no place for them to go other than what? And later, they couldn't even live on their lands in the west after they moved because we wanted them to go on reservations. Yep, so it's quite a story. Okay, they're doing a real nice job. Now we're going to talk about Virginia, child of tobacco. That's what Virginia probably is most known for. They have been known for years. And it started right back here with this Jamestown settlement. Now we'll go back to John Rolfe. Prior to his death, he was considered the father of the tobacco industry. Okay? So prior to his death, John Rolfe was considered the father of the tobacco industry. What did he do what did he do, Cody, that made Virginia an economic guru, made him a lot of money? What did he do to tobacco? What did he do in 1612 that made tobacco such a very big thing? Okay, who's got their thesaurus? You got yours, Cody? Look up pungent, P-U-N-G-E-N-T, pungent. And read that to us, pungent, P-U-N-G-E-N-T, pungent. Girls, pay attention because you're going to marry into this someday. Go ahead.
Having a sharp or stinging odor.
Having a sharp or stinging odor. That's what men are. That's what you're going to get someday. So, tobacco had a sharp or stinging odor or bad taste. And what John Rolfe did in 1612 is he perfected methods of not only raising tobacco, but curing it so it wouldn't have that pungent smell or odor to it. So by 1612, John Rolfe had perfected methods not only of raising tobacco, but getting rid of that pungent, that stinging odor or taste in the tobacco leaf. And people enjoyed it, liked to smoke it, because it didn't have that bitter, pungent taste or odor. So, pretty soon it became popular. And where did it become very popular? In Europe. Okay, so Virginia became in the middle of not a gold rush, but a tobacco rush. So they came there looking for large amounts of gold, and what turns out to be the gold for the people of Virginia and Jamestown is the tobacco rush. They were getting great money for this. And who's making the profits on this? The Virginia Company of London. Now they want that tobacco planted, man. They want it planted everywhere. They planted crops in every field they could. They planted them in the streets of Jamestown and even between graves in the cemetery. Any place there was open land to plant tobacco, they were planting. So Virginia's prosperity would be built on tobacco smoke, not gold. Okay? So because of the need for land to plant tobacco, food was imported. Okay? Why would they import food into the colonists? Why didn't the colonists grow their own food? No, why? Because they were planting tobacco. They didn't even save any land to grow their own crops to eat. So they were importing food into the colonies for the colonists. They weren't even growing their own food. They were simply growing tobacco. So because of the need for land to plant tobacco, food was actually imported for the colonists as all available soil was using for the planting of tobacco. Can you imagine that? So it was referred to as the bewitching weed. It was sometimes called. And this bewitching weed, or tobacco, played a vital role in putting the Jamestown colony on great economic foundations. This is what they needed. They weren't finding any gold. They weren't finding any passage to the East Indies. But you know what they did find, thanks to John Rolfe? They found tobacco. And tobacco became the lifeline for Virginia. Anybody know what tobacco's other nickname was instead of the bewitching weed? What? King nicotine. Okay, King nicotine. Now, all this tobacco planting and growing and sending to Europe did cause a couple of problems. One, logistically, and one that would haunt this country for many years, and maybe even today does a little bit. What do you think? Who got any farmers in here? Okay, Buck, what do you grow in your farm? Okay, now I don't know much about alfalfa. So do you plant alfalfa? Okay, you got a field here. You got a big field here. And you got then you got another field over here. You plant alfalfa in both those fields every year. Okay, why don't you do that? You can make twice as much money. Okay, that's
better the second.
Okay, so I really screwed myself up here because I know anything about alfalfa. Okay, so you plant it in the same field every year. Over and over it comes back. It's perennial. Okay, okay, I get it. Who else is a farmer? What, do you grow anything else? Okay, do you grow oats in the same field? You plant it over and over and over? I got the wrong damn farm. Who else is a farmer? Rogers, what am I getting to here? What do you plant?
You take out all the.
Thank you! There's a farm girl. Tobacco is tough on the soil. And what they did is they planted it over and over and over on the same soil and ended up ruining the soil. They didn't have the idea of crop rotation yet. Or you would plant tobacco in here one year and you'd plant maybe something else here. Then you'd rotate, or you'd leave the field blank, so to speak, and rotate fields each year. They planted tobacco everywhere, every year. And what it did is it ruined the soil when they planted it in successive years. They didn't learn about crop rotation quite yet. Okay? Second thing tobacco promoted, when that crop gets done and it has to be harvested, who's going to do the harvesting? Not yet, but because of the high demand and the plantation system coming into being, all of a sudden now they have a demand for fresh labor. So in 1619, a Dutch warship appeared off the coast of Jamestown. In 1619, after this tobacco became a really big deal in Virginia and the labor was needed, fresh labor, a Dutch warship appeared off the coast of Jamestown. And what did that Dutch warship do? Sold the colony of Jamestown 20 slaves. 20 Africans. They weren't even slaves at that time, because we didn't even know what that was. But sold them 20 Africans, who thus became what? Well, this simple transaction of 20 Africans in 1619 planted the seeds of the North American slave system for years to come, which led us into a civil war, which led us into civil rights, all of which you will learn about in the next 2 years and the impact. But just remember that it all started in 1619 when a Dutch warship landed off the coast of Jamestown and sold them the first 20 Africans that then became slaves. That's where it started. By 1650, there were 300 blacks in Virginia. In 1650, 300 blacks. By 1700, there were 1,700 blacks in Virginia, which made up about 14% of the colony's population. So by 1700, 14% of the Jamestown colony's population were black slaves. And this just perpetuates into a system that we're going to talk about for years to come here. Now, we've talked about Virginia, we've talked about the tobacco, we've talked about the slave trade, we've talked about them all dying in backwards order. What haven't we talked about that you need if you're going to have a settlement? We talked about leaders, which is kind of close. You need some type of government, okay? So in 1619, self-government was actually born in Virginia. It took till 1619 to get any kind of a government in Virginia. Now, who are they going to have to get permission from to summon a government? Not the Crown. Virginia Company of London. So in 1619, the Virginia Company of London authorized the settlers to summon what's known as an assembly. Okay? So Mackenzie, look in that handy-dandy thesaurus of yours, or dictionary, and tell me what the definition of assembly is. Might be several. We'll see if you pick one out. So the Virginia Company of London authorized the settlers in Virginia in 1619 to summon an assembly.
It's meeting, legislative body, or fitting together of parts.
Is that what it says? What's a legislative body? That's the definition of assembly. It's a legislative body. What is legislation? Law. Okay? So the assembly became the first legislative body in America. And it became known as the House of Burgess, which is on your ID sheet. So So the first form of government, the first assembly, the first legislative body in America came in 1619, known as the House of Burgess. Now that's kind of like what present-day House of Representatives or Senate. It's kind of the same idea, but way before. Okay? Now, what the House of Burgess was a miniature parliament. Okay? It was a mini parliament. Sierra Borovets, my dear, look in your handy-dandy thesaurus and tell me what a parliament is. What is a parliament? So the House of Burgess was a miniature parliament. Aren't these dictionaries great? What's a parliament?
Hold on one
Silence, the deadly embarrassment. What's a parliament? D-A-R-L.
I found parliament.
What's a parliament?
Oh, check that. Legislative assembly.
A legislative assembly. Does that make sense? It's all coming back around. So the House of Burgess was a miniature parliament or a legislative assembly. What is the House of Representatives in America? A legislative assembly. What is the Senate? A legislative assembly. Okay? Now, this was the first legislative assembly to flourish in what we know as the soil of America. Now, somebody kind of mentioned this, and it was kind of interesting, because I said, who would give them permission to do an assembly? And somebody said, who? It's a king. Well, this has kind of caused a little rub, because as time passed, King James I grew increasingly hostile towards Virginia. Okay? He didn't